think we're just gonna get started. So, and any people that trickle in. So we do have a recording of this, so we're gonna send those out to everybody in case you missed something. So we'll go from there. And if you guys have any follow-up questions, be sure to email if I missed you, and we'll get them all answered.
We understand cardiovascular health is basically a damage to the arteries, right? And you know that the liver is an organ, but we'd also, and kidneys are organs. We don't often think of diffuse things like skin or blood vessels as organs, but your blood vessels are organs. Your arteries are an organ. And when the arteries start getting problematic is when you get something called plaque. Now, plaque is defined as when the wall of the artery gets to 1.5 millimeters or greater in thickness. And you can see this on ultrasound. I actually just ultrasounded my carotid artery yesterday to take a look at it and see how it's doing. And one of the things that are commonly done, for people that have plaque. Now, 1.5 millimeters is an arbitrary value. There's nothing special about 1.5. Just a bunch of cardiologists got together and said we have to have some number, at which point we say it's plaque, and they said, okay, 1.5. But clearly you don't want any plaque. Now the common protocol in the medical world is to give statins. If you look at the reports, the studies, statins really only have any significant results when there's a huge amount of plaque and a huge amount of cholesterol. For people that have very minimal amounts or less than enormous amounts, actually it can be counterproductive. But what's less known is that statins do their work by lowering cholesterol, and CoQ10 also gets lowered. Now, the brain is made out of cholesterol, and all the sex hormones are made out of cholesterol, right? So taking statins and shutting down the sex hormones in the brain is the equivalent of having a hysterectomy, a castration, and a lobotomy. So, not the thing I would choose to use. So if we're going to try to keep our arterial system healthy, the organ of our arteries healthy as we age, then it would make sense that we'd want to understand why they're getting sick in the first place. And as I'm looking at it, I came across, 4 things we want to pay attention to. Now, the first thing is something called a pseudogene. Our body's full of genes, and genes are little snippets of information, little instruction manuals that our cells get on how to make proteins and things. And there's a few of them in us that don't work properly. The genes are there, but they don't function, so we call them pseudogenes. One of them is urate oxidase, and that's what breaks down uric acid. Ours doesn't work very well, so we end up as a side effect of that with gout. Gout is the effect of the pseudogene that should handle uric acid. We have a pseudogene for phytolysase, and that's supposed to protect our skin from skin cancer. It doesn't work very well, and as a result, humans tend to get skin cancer. And then in terms of heart disease, there's gluconolactone oxidase, which is the gene that's supposed to make vitamin C. And we don't make vitamin C, or at least the vast majority of us don't. Of the 4,000 mammals that we cataloged, there's about 4 of them that have the pseudogene that can't make vitamin C. That's fruit bats, some primates, guinea pigs, and humans. And so we are prone now instead to heart disease because vitamin C is one of the things that protects the health of the arteries. Now, we do have a backup system. Our red blood cells do have some transporters that allow them to recycle vitamin C much better than other animals, but it's a stopgap. It's a patch. It's not as good as actually making as much as you want. So one of the cheapest and easiest things you can do for your heart and for cardiovascular is understand we have a genetic flaw and, take vitamin C. And it doesn't have to be a lot. It can be something like, 500 milligrams a day. Certainly more if someone's under stress or dealing with, coronavirus or whatever. But just, a little bit can go a long way. The second thing that I believe is causing heart disease is our water supply. Now, the way the water supply works is in a lot of municipalities, they're not getting water necessarily from a pristine mountain stream or somewhere. A lot of it is reclaimed and recycled human sewage. So there's a lot of junk in the water, and obviously the municipalities have to clean the water supply. So they use something called a flocculating agent. And what they do is they put this thing into the water, this chemical. It's a mixture of iron and aluminum. But they put this thing into the water supply, and it's a very strong positive charge, and it makes everything that's floating in the water stick together, and then it drops out of solution, and then it can get filtered. So if you have really muddy, gunky water, and you put a flocculating agent in it, everything that was floating in the water drops down, and your water is cleaner and easier to filter. The problem is we have lots of things floating in our water, in our blood, right? We have platelets and red blood cells and white blood cells and all sorts of things going on in there. And they don't get all the flocculant out of the water. Better to have a little more than a little less in their reasoning because it keeps the water cleaner. But they didn't realize that when they did that, they would flocculate humans. So if you take a look at someone's blood under a microscope, one of the things you'll often see is the blood sticking together. And one of the reasons it does this is because it's flocculating. It's having that same chemical that's in the water supply into our bloodstream, and it gets rid of something called zeta potential. It takes the electrical charge off the blood cells so they all stick together. Now, one of the things that does, in addition to lowering the oxygen capacity of the blood, is it can cause the blood to start slightly coagulate. Now, so a person cuts themselves and they form a scab. And that's important because otherwise, hemophiliacs can bleed to death from a paper cut. An exaggeration, but you know what I'm saying. So, we have a system in our body that's designed to coagulate blood so that if it's exposed to air, if we get injured, we don't bleed to death. But with flocculants in us, we start coagulating slightly on the inside. And if you look at live blood under a microscope, and you see these, the fibrin and the platelets, they're sharp. And I believe what happens is as these are going through our blood, our arteries, they're actually kind of sandpapering or sandblasting and scraping the arterial wall. And one of the things I point to in this is if you look at where plaque forms in the 100,000 miles of arteries, right? If you look where it happens where they curve or where they branch. And I think that's indicative that it's turbulence. These are places where the blood kind of loops and spins and bounces a little bit. And so I believe these are places where the sharp crystalline aspects of coagulated blood are just scraping away at the artery over and over again. Now, one of the things that is kind of misunderstood about plaque is a lot of times people will use an analogy of a pipe from an old house with a lot of crud on the inside, right, a mineral deposit. And they'll say, well, that's the plaque and you must clean it out. But that's not how it happens. Plaque isn't something that accumulates necessarily like that. Calcifications can to a degree, but plaque is actually a growth of the wall of the artery itself, right? So imagine, somebody gets a black eye, right? What happens? It swells up. It gets thicker temporarily, right? Now, or let's say someone gets an injury and they get an injury of the skin of their arm, right? And a scab forms. And for some reason, the scab gets knocked off and another scab forms, and they just keep bumping it off by mistake. Eventually, they're going to have scar tissue there. It's going to be thicker, tougher material, right? So this is kind of what happens in the arteries. We have this chronic scraping of the artery wall and a lack of vitamin C to repair it. And so it's this chronic wound, it's this chronic ulcer, a chronic irritation, and the body goes, well, I should do something here to reinforce this, right? Because if it rips open, the person can bleed to death internally or have a hemorrhagic stroke. So it releases something called LDL, which everybody thinks is this terrible thing that you want to lower with statins. what LDL does is it's a growth promoter. It causes the tissue of the artery to get thicker. And so this is the tougher scar tissue, right? It's trying to bolster up this weak area that's getting damaged. Now, it's also like a glue that holds everything together. Now, the body, if the plaque gets thick enough, it could actually block the artery completely. It could completely knock it out. And sometimes you hear of someone who goes to the doctor, and the doctor checks their arteries, the coronary vessels of their heart, and they say, oh my gosh, your artery is 98% blocked. Well, how is that person still alive? How come they didn't have a heart attack? 98% blocked. That means, you know, I couldn't breathe through get by with 98% of my breathing blocked, you know, but we're supposed to think our heart survive with 98% of its blood supply at a particular section of the heart blocked. So that's another hint. So what goes on is when the arteries start to thicken and start to block off, the body generates new blood vessels around it. It's called collateral growth. So yes, someone can have a 98% blocked artery, and it's not a great thing and it could very well kill them. But as long as they can sprout new arteries and new coronary vessels around the damaged tissue, it becomes a non-issue, right? It's like, yes, you can block off a major highway to a city so long as you've built new highways and new bridges and new tunnels. The challenge is toxins block collateral growth. So things like lead and mercury and nicotine, those are the ones I could find. I'm sure lots of others do it. Damage the body's ability to form good new blood vessels. And so now, you know, the body has a system of patchworks, right? We lost the ability to make vitamin C. Body says, okay, I'll recycle it. But then we ended up needing, you know, adding in coagulated, flocculated water and damaging the arteries. And so now the body goes, okay, well, I'll rebolster the sides of the arteries and grow new blood vessels. But then we add toxins and it can't grow new blood vessels. And the body's like, well, now what? So that is my kind of understanding of the progression of how heart disease happens and then how we need to work our way back out of it.